so here we go. Section 3.3 is called completing the square. Now with section 3.3, I want you to understand a couple things. I'm only going to ask you to do this a couple times, okay? I'm not going to ask this to be your favorite method because in all honesty, it is nobody's favorite method. Nobody loves doing completing the square. People particularly love factoring and they love using the quadratic formula, but completing the square is not something that people choose. If you are choosing to take calculus, you will use this in calc. For this class though, you have to know how to do it. And if you understand how to do it, then moving forward shouldn't be that big of a deal, okay? I'm probably gonna ask you to do this a few times, once for sure for like your homework stuff. And then once again, you know, on the quiz and on the test. And then after that, I'll probably never ask you to do it again. But completing the square is just a way that we have to solve using roots. It's just a way that you can, it allows you to solve using roots. So that's all it allows us to do, is it allows us to solve using roots, which is exactly the same kind of example that was asked earlier from your homework. It allowed us to move things over to the other side, take the square root and then solve. Okay, maybe easier sometimes, most likely it's not. But in this case, what we're going to do is we have a general form, and that general form is going to be something like this, where it's ax squared plus bx plus c. And that is going to equal 0. This is what it looks like when it solves. Okay, when you are asked to solve it, this is what it should set up to look like. Now, most of the time, what you're going to do is you're going to factor this. You would find two numbers to multiply to give you c and add to give you b and move on. We're going to just show a different way, just in case. Okay, so the thing that you're going to do, I'm going to kind of write the list of steps here, and then I'm going to show you what you're going to do on this side. The first thing that you're going to do is move the constant to the other side. So you're going to move the constant to the other side of the equation. Okay, so that means I'm going to move c over to the other side. So it's going to become ax squared plus bx, ax squared plus bx equals negative c. So I've moved that thing over to the other side. Okay, now the next step, and this is probably the most important step, is you have to add, and this is the important part, you have to add b over 2 squared to both sides. Now keep in mind, this is the general form of everything. I am going to make sure that I go through a couple examples with you of the normal type numbers. Okay, so I'm adding b over 2 squared to both sides of the equation, so it ends up looking like this. So it looks something like that. And then finally, the last thing would be to factor it. Okay, and now the nice thing about this whole idea, the reason that we did this step right here is because this will always, 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 always factor into, it will always factor into x plus whatever b over 2 was squared, and then it will equal the stuff on the right side. So I know this probably doesn't make a lot of sense for the people who don't like general forms. So if you don't like general forms and you're looking at something like this, you probably hate what you're seeing because it doesn't make any sense. Some people in here know and understand their general forms, and if you understand your general form, then this should make a lot of sense to you. But this is all the steps that you have to do, and it really shouldn't be that bad most of the time. Does anyone need more time copying this down? Because I'm going to go and do an example which should make it a lot more clear. All right, so the example that I want to run through looks like this. If we have x squared minus 18x plus 5. Now, as of right now, you guys would try, or you should try, the normal progression would be, okay, are there any numbers that multiply to give me 5 and add together to give me negative 18? Which obviously there aren't, right? The only two numbers that can multiply to give you 5 are 1 and 5, and there's no way to get to 18 with that. So since there's no way to get to 18 with that, your next step would probably be to use the quadratic formula. So that's a great step. But if I'm asking you to complete the square, then you need to follow the progression to complete the square. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are first going to, our step one is to move the constant to the other side. So that's this 5, move it to the other side. So I'm going to end up with x squared minus 18x equals negative 5. Okay, so x squared minus 18x equals negative 5. Now what I'm going to do for my step 2, the first thing I'm going to find is what b over 2 is. b over 2, and I'm going to take this negative with it. b over 2 is negative 18 over 2, which is negative 9, right? Because negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. Now the most important step of this entire thing is squaring that number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take negative 9 and I'm going to square it to get 81. That's the number I'm going to add to both sides of the equation. Okay, so I'm going to take x squared minus 18x, and then I'm going to add 81 to both sides of the equation. So plus 81. All right, so now I'm going to just combine everything on this side, or factor this side and combine everything on this side. So one thing to remember is for step 3, you factor. And remember how I said that it factors into x plus whatever b over 2 was. And in this case, b over 2 is negative 9. So x plus negative 9, which is the same thing as x minus 9. And then negative 5 plus 81 is 76. And now it's in a form that we can solve using roots. Okay? Now I know that this may not be easier than anything else, but it is a process that you kind of have to know if you decide to take calculus, and it is a process that you may have to know if you're deciding to take, or when you take the SAT. All right? So now this is just a normal process. Again, I'm going to go through every one of the steps that I did up here just to re-explain it. I have my normal equation. The first thing I did was move this 5 over to the other side, and it became negative 5. Then I took b over 2, so negative 18 divided by 2, which was negative 9. I took negative 9 and I squared it. 81 was added to both sides of the equation, just like this. So 81 was added to both sides of the equation. My next step was to factor, and it always factors into x plus b over 2. b over 2 was negative 9. So x plus negative 9 is the same thing as x minus 9. We put the squared there because that's what it factors into, and then that equals 76 because negative 5 plus 81 is 76. So now the last step is just to solve. Now this step is one that you should already know because we've already done it several times. So we take the square root of both sides. So I get x minus 9 equals plus or minus the square root of 76. Now this is a nice one for us because it's not a negative, but it actually could happen. It could be a negative. Okay, so I'm going to go up here and take the square root of 76, and I'm going to try to break it down. I know right off the top of my head that 4 goes in there because 4 times 19 is 76. That might be one that you struggle with a little bit more trying to find that number. That's okay. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 19 can't simplify anymore, so I'm just going to leave it like that. So this will then end up being x minus 9 equals plus or minus 2 square roots of 19. And then I can add 9 to both sides, so I end up with x equals 9 plus or minus 2 square roots of 19. Now the quadratic formula would get you the exact same answer as what you had right here. But technically we don't know how to deal with the quadratic formula yet, so that's just something that you have to kind of pay attention to. Okay? So it's just a different thing that you have to make sure that you're paying attention to.
Does it have to be in that form with like the 9 on that side, or could you have like added 9 to the end of that?
Say it again? Oh, you're saying like put a plus 9 back here?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do that as well. This is the way that you're going to see it in the book and the SAT and from me every time. But if you would have written it as x equals plus or minus 2 square roots of 19 plus 9, that technically is still correct. Okay, The next way that they can write this, and it means the exact same thing, is they might ask you to find the value of C so that x squared plus 40x plus C is a perfect square trinomial. This is asking you to do the same exact thing that we just did, except you don't have to solve anything. So what they want you to do is they want you to find the value of C that you're going to put right here to be able to factor this perfectly. So this is saying x squared plus 40x plus C. They want to know what value C has to be in order for me to rewrite this as x plus something squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my b over 2, which is 20, and then I'm going to take that 20 and I'm going to square it, which is 400. So that 400 will get added right here, because when you do x squared plus 40x plus 400, that will factor into x plus b squared. So this is the value of C. When they ask you this, they're not asking for 20, they're asking for 400, because that makes it a perfect square. This thing is a perfect square, because when you take the square root of it, it's very, very nice. So that thing is the perfect square. C would be 400. So if you have this as a question, your C value would be 400.
Is that all you're trying to find typically, is just the 400?
In that specific question, yes, but there are different questions that just ask you to solve. So I'm going to give you one more right now while I'm staring at you. And I want you guys to try one while you're just watching and doing whatever, and then try to solve it. So this one is a little bit more similar to the first one that we did. So this one would be to solve, and you're solving for x. And the question would be something like x squared minus 10x plus 7 equals 0. So I'm going to give you guys time to try this one while I'm here with you, and then we're going to run through it together. You guys do have another 2-question thing on big ideas, but if you understand the 2 things that we just talked about, you should be good. So the big thing with big ideas is there's going to be a ton of those grades. I mean, that's how I'm checking to see if you're actually doing your work. So participation doesn't mean anything on tests and quizzes. So I apologize that you guys don't like the fact that this doesn't give you a whole bunch of partial credit and stuff, but we should have probably like 7 or 8 of these things by the time we're done with this virtual shutdown. All right, so let's go through it. We can look at it. If you don't want to see this, then don't look. But this is just something that we're going to run through. So we first move that 7 over to the other side. Then we take our b over 2. We're going to take that -5 and we're going to square it. So then I'm going to be left with x squared minus 10x. This is the thing we're adding to both sides, so plus 25. The biggest thing that I see is that people forget to add that 25 to both sides of the equation. So the biggest thing I see is that we forget to add 25 to both sides. So now we can factor, and this will factor into x plus that number right there. That number was -5, so x plus -5 is the same thing as x minus 5. And then -7 plus 25 is positive 18. And now we just solve. So we take the square root, take the square root. So up here, I'm going to take the square root of 18, and I know that the square root of 9 goes in there, and the square root of 2. So this is really the same thing as x minus 5 equals plus or minus 3 square roots of 2. So then it's x equals 5 plus or minus 3 square roots of 2. So you guys do have a 2-question thing on big ideas. It is due by midnight tonight. You have the ability to ask questions. I don't have anything going on. Actually, today I have a book study thing, but most of the time I don't have anything going on after school from 1 to 3. So before you take your big ideas, if you're really lost and confused and don't know what you're doing, you can ask me a question. Okay. You can set up a Zoom. You can talk to me on Zoom, whatever you need to do. You can ask me those questions to get them sorted out before your big ideas stuff. Okay.